Man, look at the difference between this, the original. Ooh, man, oh man. Wow, look at that. Look at what's going on in there. And that's because of the texture. Look at what the texture's doing. God, I love to fail. When you pick yourself up and start over, there's so many possibilities. Hey, welcome back. As you can tell, I love texture. And wet techniques give us texture. Today's texture is developed with alcohol and pushing around old pigment. I'm going to call this a failed painting. It was really just a demo. Today I'm going to use rags and some 5 and dime store household tools that are easy to find. But you can see that if you had a failed painting, how you can push that pigment around and create some interest. We're going to do some surprising things. So let's get started with some alcohol and some other tools. And if you are enjoying this content, please hit the like button. Even if you're a subscriber, it helps other people find this. Okay. I like my bristle brushes, my little chip brushes that I get at the hardware. I can see if I can dissolve some of that pastel, and maybe, just maybe, sometimes it dissolves some of the layers underneath, and if I wipe it and I rub it, I'll get something I can follow to make something new out of it. And failing that, I'm going to see if I can get some drips maybe I can follow. Maybe this thing will turn into a woodlands looking through some trees, a fence row. Doesn't look like the drips are doing a lot, so let me try to fill in and see what happens from there. Again, it's just experimenting. I'm taking something and I'm trying to make it new. And sometimes you just don't know what the right technique is. So developing these tools in your toolbox. Taking this pot scrubber, I'm going to scrape up and see if I can create some runs and see if it will reveal anything underneath. This is a pretty stubborn painting. It's got apparently some really dense. I must have used some fixative or something on this to make it not separate and not come off completely. I really like when I use the gloved hand on this and pull some of that pigment up. After you've soaked it really well, you sometimes can move the pigment around and it's working here. And when all else fails, let's turn it upside down or sideways. And I'm really starting to like when I turn this thing upside down. Look at this. I've got some light trees and a dark sky. It really makes it more interesting, I think. And now I'm still pulling that wetted, moistened pigment with the alcohol down into it. Just trial and error. When you're destroying an old piece and trying to get something new, just keep playing with it until you see some things that you think you can work with. And what you think you can work with today, on a different day or as you progress, you're going to find that you're going to see things in things later that you wouldn't see working today. So don't be afraid to experiment and realize that over time those experiments will change. Now I see some things. I can see some light trees or some trees that'll have some highlights here. And so I'm taking my chip brush, and because I'm thinking trees, I am going to paint this clear gesso on. It dries clear, kind of frosty clear, but it looks like it's white gesso, but it's really not. It's got pumice in it. And I'm going to paint that as though there were branches of trees overlapping one another, and that will help as kind of keeping that pattern helps me as I try to develop this by adding color later. So if in this case my mind is seeing trees, so I am going to use the gesso added and as though I am painting color onto trees. That's just going to help me as I add pigment later. And you see as I go across the sky is horizontal. I'm trying to create some movement that way. So those textures will vary from swirls to horizontal brush strokes to brush strokes that simulate branches. It's kind of like painting in the air, where you're really not putting pigment on, but you're just creating the future substrate that will work with you. Now underneath those trees, I'm going to try to get some more texture. There could be some shrubs, there could be some weeds. I'll go back and forth and simulate some things that might appear later on when I add color. Once we're satisfied with the clear gesso and trying to get the mark making the way we like, we'll let that dry. And now you can see some of those light areas and dark areas coming back. You can see those shapes in there that they've become a little more subtle as the pigment continued to blend with that clear gesso and the sky and some background. So we can take it and we can turn it. We can see if there's any other possibilities, because turn it sideways, turn it right side up. And ultimately, I think we go back to having it upside down from its original form. I still like those light areas against that darker sky, and the roughness of what used to be the sky now is the foreground. There's some interesting shapes and ghosts in there after that destruction process. Picking a color palette, I decided to use some pinks and some yellows and oranges in there. So this was kind of a quick little sketch that I did. I put that up over my easel, and I'll use it as a guide as I start to add color. You don't have to be married to the colors that are what we call local color, blue skies and green grass. You can change your color palette, and I like to play with color. So I'm going to stick some of those colors in there. I think when I add color, I like to always work in layers. So I'm constantly thinking about, well, if I use this kind of aqua blue underneath here, and I put some pinks over it, or some red violets over it, you know, how are these colors going to mix? I'm constantly thinking ahead in terms of layering. So I can create some grays by mixing reds and greens, or blues and oranges. And I like those red violets. Again, here's the two preliminary drawings I did, but I chose this one that is more pinkish and has a little bit more red violet in it rather than blue violets. So I'm just following ghosts. You'll notice I'm not pressing really hard to fill the entire texture that was created with the gesso. I want these skips and jumps. That's what adds the interest. And putting this blue-gray, I'm getting a blue-gray by putting, it comes out blue-gray, but it's by putting this aqua blue over the red and green, make a gray. So that's how it ends up gray. Again, I'm always thinking in layers. There's various ways. You can watch one of my videos that talks about blending using gloves, fingers, and different tools. And so I know what my glove will do. I'm trying to fill in some of those skips and jumps, but I'm not trying to fill them all in. I want those dark areas. They're going to create that interest that I'm looking for in the finished picture. And again, until you do this, until you try to use heavy texture, you're not going to understand what I'm doing there so much. I'm working from experience, but you can see that I don't fill everything in. And I'm going back to my colors, and I'm pulling out colors of the same family, different set of values, different set of, if we turn these colors into gray values, they'll be a little lighter. So the darkness from that alcohol wash, working with alcohol over a previous pastel, will often darken some of those things, especially if you do what I did and you blend all those colors together to knock them down and create less separation between the brightest colors and the darkest darks. So I'm taking those gray values when you change them to color, and I'm narrowing the focus. That's what tonalism does, is it narrows the gray values. Instead of being a white going to a black, the values difference is narrowed greatly, and you rely on the bright color or the dark color to create a sense of separation rather than black to white. Diane Townsend makes some of these fluorescent colors. Now, they don't photograph well, but boy, visually in person, I'm sure that when I send in some of these paintings that have these fluorescents and they're being judged by the photographs, I'm sure I'm not getting the credit that I would if this was being judged visually and in person. But that's okay, because I paint for myself, not for competition. I enjoy competitions. It's a great way to see where you are and see what your peers who are doing the judging think of the work that you submit. But it's just a fact that not everything in a photograph is going to be, not everything when you photograph is going to translate as well in the judging process as if it was one-to-one or in person. But that's the processes we've got. You just live with it. No sense complaining about it. It's just part of the artist's life. At this particular point, I'm going to start trying to adjust some of the values, and I'm taking the big shapes and creating some smaller shapes within those big shapes. What I'm seeing here is I'm seeing a set of trees maybe at the edge of a wooded area, and the wooded area is the violet going off into the distance, maybe on a hillside or something. So I'm focusing and trying to remember we saw that light area from the ghosts that were created, and we're trying to focus that and create a little lighter values with the reds in front of the violets. Now I want to mix in, I'm going to use some more gesso. I'm going to use it not over the entire area, but I'm going to blend some of these areas. And again, the gesso, the clear gesso is mixing with the soft pastel. It takes a little more effort to get it to mix, but I'm going to be able to create some shapes that are a little more cohesive, or maybe make a little bit more sense. So I don't always go back in with alcohol or a clear gesso, but in this case I did. All right, Spectrafix or final fixative, a lot of people call it the Degas fixative. I am going to spray that on just a little bit to try to fix some of those colors in. The gesso is still wet, but it's an alcohol based with just a little bit of beeswax and milk casein, and you get a truer color. It doesn't darken things as much as lacquer fixatives, so a lot of times I will use that, and that will help fix things so that I can paint over it. So we'll let that dry now. Wow! After that gesso dried, look at this. Ooh, I'm loving this. I'm loving this. Created shadows and light. Oh man. Look at what the texture's doing. After that gesso's dried, now I'm going to go in. There's more ghosts that were created. There were more shapes. And I'm going to go in and try to accentuate those with, again, some of the same hues, same color hues, but in the values that need to be darker. By mixing the same hues and the same color family, I get a lot of variation in this. So I'm going to go through this, and now it's just a sparingly touch up in some of these areas and follow some of those ghosts that were left during that destruction process with that clear gesso. We're well past the stage of blocking this thing in. We're in the middle stages. And so from this point, I may speed this up a little bit, and you can just see the process of making smaller shapes within the larger shapes, using changing the different pastel sticks that are all part of the same red family, or the red-orange family, or the violet family, and the blue family, depending on what part of the painting I'm working on. So let me speed this thing up, and we'll get closer to the finish. Okay, back to regular speed here. You can see that some of these larger areas, by using the different pastels, all I've done is break up those areas to create the sense of more trees overlapping one another, to create more interest in the red-violet trees going off into the distance. The sky isn't really an area I want to draw interest to, so I'm going to fill in some of those sky gaps a little bit. You saw what we started out with, and here's the sketch, one of the two sketches. And just because you decide to follow a sketch, allow yourself to follow the ghost in what comes out of the sketch. Don't be a slave to your studies and your designs. Well, that's it. I hope you got something out of that. I hope you learned how we can push that pigment around using some alcohol and some other tools. And whether it was a demo like I use or a failed painting, you can come up with some really, really interesting effects using alcohol on some of these older pastels. So until next time, happy painting, everybody. And keep your pastels dry and your brushes wet, and we'll have something else for you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.